All right, Mr. Cooney, I don't know where you wanted to start this morning, but since Ms. Williams is here, maybe we should go back to her concerning information that she told the court about before we broke. I asked her a question and she seemed somewhat befuddled by what it was I was asking her. I was asking her, what did she want me to do as far as Mr. Jones was concerned? And ultimately, she said, inform him of his rights. So I guess maybe we need to go back there and first of all, talk to you, Ms. Williams, about what it is you think you're doing, what it is you think you're doing for Mr. Jones and how you were put in that position. I think I know how it happened, but I'm not sure we put it on the record.
Thank you.
I think Mr. Campbell probably had some contact with IDS or the Capital Defender
yes,
or both.
I apologize.
And you think you are what? Appointed by someone to represent Mr. Jones? Or I doubt that either one of those parties has statutory authority to appoint you for a case where Mr. Jones is not criminally charged with anything at this point.
No, they typically would have faxed that over the clerk's office.
I believe you. I don't
Okay.
listen.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I consider myself being appointed by the capital defender on a charge of a potentially first-degree murder case, as I have done 75 other times in the state of North Carolina.
So you believe there's a possibility that Mr. Jones could be charged with a murder offense, or is there some other offense?
Well, Your Honor, interestingly enough, Mr. Jones, at the date of offense of this homicide, as I said, I met with him for the first time only yesterday, but his age was 15 years old. So if he is charged with anything out of these proceedings at any point, the appropriate jurisdiction would be a juvenile court. But as you indicated yesterday, as I saw from the television coverage, he has not been charged. Apparently the DNA results, whatever they are, have been known in the state since 2011. So there is, as the court knows, possible and probable. They are often not the same thing. So as to the question of whether or not it's possible, it is a clear yes. Whether or not it's probable.
Well, Mr. Scheck said he believed, based on evidence that he has seen, that Mr. Jones was admitting to having sexual intercourse with a 13-year-old, which
at the time he would have been 15, Judge, and I did pull the statutes yesterday because of assuming that that is a true statement. It would not have been a crime in this state at that date due to their ages. He would not have been. I actually spoke further with Cynthia Kenny, who is a long-term state prosecutor here in the state of North Carolina, both the Wake and Durham counties. It was her opinion as well. It would not, consensual sex between the 13 and the 15-year-old would not have been illegal in 1991. If, in fact, as I understood from the presentation yesterday, that there was sex, which my client denies, between the mother. If that was a crime, he would have been the victim of the crime, and the adult would have been the perpetrator of the crime, as he was under the age of consent.
as I indicated, nonetheless interesting.
Okay, what is your question then? I misunderstood.
I don't have a question. My question is, what do you think you're doing?
I believe that I represent him well.
All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Scheck.
I would call Jermac Jones.
Say it again?
I call him.
Yeah.
Jermac Jones.
Yeah. Well, no, there's one more thing we need to talk about, which is how this is going to proceed. How do you think it's going to proceed, Ms. Williams? You're going to do what as Mr. Scheck or someone else attempts to ask Mr. Jones questions?
I would advise and allow Mr. Jones to answer the question as to his name and his date of birth. As to any other question, he will be asserting both the Fifth Amendment and his privilege under Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution.
Knowing that, Mr. Scheck, how do you intend to proceed?
Well, mindful as I am of how these situations ordinarily unfold, I would call Mr. Jones to the witness stand. I would ask him his name, his date of birth. I would ask him if he was involved in the sexual assault murder of Doris Washington and Nishonda Washington. I would ask him if he had sexual intercourse with Doris Washington and questions along those lines. And I anticipate, based on what counsel says, that he would take the Fifth Amendment to all those questions and anything that would be relevant to these proceedings. That's my understanding.
All right.
Your Honor, further, I think that there's some guidance in the case law that indicates that the court is satisfied that the answers to the question would be an assertion of the Fifth Amendment, that you essentially can bypass the proceedings or allow the questions to proceed as I've indicated. But I think that you're allowed to take notice of what the representations are and basically find that he's going to assert the privilege and not call him. I read that from something off of the Institute of Government's website last night, or we can do it either way. I don't anticipate him answering anything other than his name and his date of birth.
Well, this comes up in a number of different ways, probably most often in front of a jury, but
it does.
We don't have that situation. So.
In fact,
the other question, Your Honor, that I might ask, or would ask, is if at any time since he was brought in and spoke to the detectives in this case, and we do have a videotape of that and a transcript, as of course you've seen, whether he has been offered immunity of any kind in order to get any information he has about the crime.
Your Honor, what I would say to the court is there is a procedure for an application of immunity. I asked Mr. Scheck, because I was so new to the proceedings yesterday, whether there was one. As you know, the DA's office has the exclusive ability to request an immunity. The court would have to authorize it. I'm aware of no such agreements, and that's part of the reason for the assertion of the privilege. I
was going to ask him if anybody on his behalf or to his knowledge had at any time prior to this proceeding engaged in any such negotiations.
Give me 1 second, Judge.
I don't think the state thinks he committed a crime.
Give me 1 second, Judge.
Well, whether the state thinks he committed a crime or not, I think it's self-evident and will be when you look at the tape and we review it together, that if his semen is there and based on his answers, he must have knowledge of the crime, even according to their theories.
I didn't say it. I think the state was right.
Yeah, I understand.
Now, what I would say, the only response I have to Mr. Scheck, and I answered the question with the client's consent, is strictly that from 2011 until yesterday, he had no contact with law enforcement or anyone from the district attorney's office. The only investigators that he even attempted to speak to him in the interim would be persons working on behalf of Mr. Howard.
All right, so how physically are we going to do this? I'm going to stay right here where I am. Mr. Jones is going to be in the, Mr. Jones is going to be over here.
Mr. Jones is going to be over there.
You're going to be where?
I would request permission to be next to him.
Yeah, I'm saying, you need to come up here and get ready.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you should not give the court in the case now being heard to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You can be seated.
It says I decline to answer the questions based on the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution. Okay. Your name and your date of birth. Anything else? I'm not touching it.
Is your name Jermac Jones?
Yes, it is.
And what is your date of birth?
12/12/75.
Did you participate in any way in the sexual assault and murder of Doris Washington?
On the advice of my counsel, I decided to answer the question based on the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Amendment Constitution, Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution.
Did you have sexual intercourse with Doris Washington at any time?
Same thing.
On the advice of counsel, I declined to answer the question based on the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Amendment Constitution, Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution.
Do you have any knowledge whatsoever of who attacked Doris Washington and Nishonda Washington on the day of their murders?
On the advice of counsel, I'm declined to answer the question based on the Fifth Amendment to the United States Amendment Constitution, Section 23, Article 1 of the United States of North Carolina Constitution.
When you were interrogated by police officers with respect to these murders and the fact that your semen was in Doris Washington, did you have telephone conversations with any individuals that had knowledge of how Doris Washington and Nishonda Washington were murdered?
On the advice of counsel, I decline to answer the question based on the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Amendment Constitution, Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution.
Has any member of the prosecutor's office or law enforcement at any time negotiated with you to give you immunity to find out what you know of these murders?
Same thing.
On the advice of counsel, I decline to answer the question based on the Fifth Amendment to the United States Amendment Constitution, Section 23, Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution.
Your Honor, I think that is sufficient.
Say it again.
I think that those sufficient. Any other question that I ask you about the events surrounding the murder of Doris Washington, Nishonda Washington, or your relationships with either one of them, are you going to take the Fifth Amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. I'm finished.
All right. You can come down.
Thank you very much.
He's released, we're free to leave. He's free to leave. We're released, he's free to leave, Mr. Shea.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
All right.
Well, it's not. I guess ultimately it's their choice.
Is he free to leave? Thank you very much.
All right.
Your Honor, just some catch-up things. I would like to introduce from Professor Miller's examination yesterday, Defendants Exhibit 16, which was her curriculum vitae. Defendants Exhibit 17, which was a photograph of the crime scene. Defendants Exhibit 18, which was a photograph of the crime scene. And then what we marked as Defendants Exhibit 19, which was a blow-up of Defendants Exhibit 3 from the trial.
All right. Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
It's allowed.
Your Honor, the defendants called Dr. Christina Roberts.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you should not give the court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You can be seated.
Good morning, Dr. Roberts.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Christina Roberts.
And what is your present occupation?
I'm a forensic pathologist consultant, and I do that on my company name is CJ Consulting.
And what is a forensic pathologist?
Well, a forensic pathologist is a physician who is specially trained in the field of forensics, looking at the effect of trauma on the body, whether that is a gunshot wound, a stab wound, or a beating, assault, and determining cause and manner of death, and also determining mechanism of injury.
Dr. Roberts, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendants Exhibit 20. Can you identify what Defendants Exhibit 20 appears to be?
This is a copy of my CV.
And does your CV describe your training and experience throughout your career and also in the field of forensic pathology?
Yes.
Would Defendants Exhibit 20 assist you in describing your qualifications for the court?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time we would move into evidence, Defendants Exhibit 20.
It's allowed.
Dr. Roberts, can you please tell the court where you went to college?
Certainly. My undergraduate degree is from the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida.
And after completing college, did you have any forensic experience before attending medical school?
Yes. Well, prior to actually attending college in the mid-1980s, I worked with a forensic anthropologist, Dr. William Maples, at the University of Florida.
And after attending college, did you attend medical school?
Yes, I did, at the University of South Florida.
And did you receive a medical degree from the University of South Florida?
Yes.
And did you undergo any additional training following medical school?
Yes, I did my pathology training at both the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, and the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida.
And can you describe, in general, very briefly, what your pathology training consisted of?
Well, pathologist is that physician in the hospital who, if something is removed during surgery, tells you whether or not that's a tumor, for instance, and they also do hospital-based autopsies. In addition to my normal pathology training, I elected to have additional forensic pathology training during my residency before my fellowship that was to follow.
Following your residency, did you engage in a fellowship in forensic pathology?
Yes. My fellowship was at the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office in District 13.
And can you tell us what your forensic pathology fellowship consisted of?
The Forensic Pathology Fellowship focuses on an entire crime scene investigation. So attending the crime scenes, doing a death investigation, combining that with all the information from the police investigation with the findings from autopsy and determining cause and manner of death. You're also answered questions concerning mechanism of injury, amount of force required to produce an injury, timing of injuries in relationship to the time of death.
I noticed that in this case, one of the autopsies was performed by Dr. Karen Chancellor, who at that time was a fellow in forensic pathology. Is that, would she have been in a similar position you would have been?
Yes.
Okay. Once you completed your fellowship, were you employed as a medical physician practicing in forensic pathology?
Yes, first at the District 5 office in Leesburg, Florida, that serviced a 5-county area, and after that as an assistant chief medical examiner in Roanoke, Virginia.
And since leaving that post, have you continued to act as a medical physician who practices forensic pathology?
Yes.
And do you continue to do autopsy?
Yes.
And what kind of autopsies are those?
I do private autopsies for families. Sometimes those are facilitated through an attorney for a family, and I also do exhumation autopsies.
In addition to that, do you do any testifying in court?
Yes, in my role as consulting.
Let me ask you, as you sit here today, do you have an estimate of the number of autopsies you performed?
Somewhere over 2,000.
And have you been qualified as an expert in forensic pathology previously?
Yes, in Florida, North Carolina, and Virginia.
And as you indicate, you have testified in cases previously. You testified both for prosecutors and for defense lawyers.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer Dr. Roberts as a physician who practices in the area of forensic pathology as an expert and ask that she be permitted to testify as such and offer opinions.
Any objection, Ms. Evans?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, your motion is on.
Thank you. Dr. Roberts, at the request of the Innocence Project, did you agree to review some materials in this case?
Yes.
I'd like to review with you the materials that you reviewed. Did you review the autopsy report from Nishonda Washington?
Yes, I did.
Did you recently have an opportunity to review the complete Office of Chief Medical Examiner file on Nishonda Washington?
I believe that, yes, all the information that was given to me was the complete file, correct?
Okay. And did you review the autopsy of Doris Washington?
Yes.
And that included the Office of Chief Medical Examiner complete file?
Yes.
And did you review photographs taken at the autopsy of Nishonda Washington?
Yes.
And did you review photographs taken at the autopsy of Doris Washington?
Yes.
And did you review the testimony of Dr. Robert Thompson?
I did.
And who is Dr. Thompson?
Dr. Thompson was the attending physician who performed one of the autopsies, and he oversaw Dr. Chancellor performing the other autopsy.
And Dr. Thompson testified at Darryl Howard's trial.
Correct.
And I think for the record, Dr. Thompson performed Nishonda Washington's autopsy, and Dr. Chancellor performed Doris Washington's autopsy.
Yes.
Based upon the materials you reviewed, your knowledge, your training, and your experience, have you formed opinions in this case?
Yes.
I'd like to go ahead and discuss your opinions with you if I can. First of all, let me hand you some things and then I'll mark some pages. I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Defendants Exhibits 21 and 22.
Shall I put this one over there?
Yeah. Now, what do Defendants Exhibit 21 and 22 appear to be?
Defendants Exhibit 21 begins with a report of investigation by medical examiner concerning the autopsy of Nishonda Washington, including the body diagram and narrative. There are some sheets that are part of the complete medical examiner's file. And that is followed by the autopsy report.
And the Office of Chief Medical Examiner is a public agency in the state of North Carolina,
Yes.
required by law to conduct autopsies and make these reports.
Yes.
And can you describe what Defendants Exhibit 22 is?
Defendants Exhibit 22 begins with a report of investigation by medical examiner for Doris Washington. It also includes documents that were part of the complete file and is followed by the autopsy report.
And again, These materials in Defendants Exhibit 22 would be the materials and records of a public agency of the state of North Carolina,
Yes.
charged with the duty by law to report and observe the details set forth in Defendants Exhibit 22.
Yes.
And both Defendants Exhibit 21 and 22, to your knowledge, would be done in the regular course of the business of the Office of Chief Medical Examiner.
Yes.
If you can tell us, on the first page of Defendants Exhibit 21 and 22, they have an officer identified. Do you see that in the middle of the page?
I do.
And who is that officer?
Officer Dowdy, D-O-W-D-Y.
And based on your knowledge, your training experience, would that indicate that's the officer who effectively was working with the Office of Chief Medical Examiner on these homicides and these autopsies?
Yes, and as this report is prepared by the local medical examiner, I would be under the assumption that that is the person that provided some of the information contained in this report.
What I'd like to do, and I've got 4 of us in this, is for the record, could you read the OCME number for Nishonda Washington and Doris Washington, so we can kind of keep them separated?
Certainly. From Defendants Exhibit 21, Nishonda Washington, the OCME number is 91-1122.
And for Doris Washington?
From Defendants Exhibit 22 for Doris Washington, the OCME number is 91-1121.
All right. I'd like to show you 2 documents. Which I will mark as Defendants 23 and 24. And I'm marking the one that says 91-1121 as 23. The document marked 91-1122 is 24. Have you seen these documents before?
Yes.
Are these documents actually contained within Defendants Exhibits 21 and 22?
Yes, they are.
These are part of the Office of Chief Medical Examiner file.
Yes.
And in fact, the Office of Chief Medical Examiner is at the top of these documents.
Correct.
And for 91-1121, can you read what the notation in handwriting says?
Certainly. And can I read it from here because my contacts are better? So I'm like squinting to see that. And please tell me again which one you asked about first.
91-1121, the handwriting.
91-1121 for Doris Washington. The handwriting there at the mid-bottom page say, police want rape kit and cocaine.
And what did you interpret that to mean?
That the police had requested a rape kit be performed during the autopsy, and they also wanted to make sure that toxicology included testing for cocaine.
Okay. And then for 91-122, which is marked as Defendants Exhibit 24, could you read what the handwriting says?
Certainly. And that is for Nishonda Washington. The handwriting says, police want rape kit and cocaine.
In your experience, Dr. Roberts, why did the police ask a medical examiner or a forensic pathologist for a rape kit?
Because they suspect that sexual assault was part of the crime, and they are looking for trace evidence for a perpetrator.
So would this indicate, at least as of this point in time, the police suspected there were sexual assaults and rapes?
Correct, before the time of the autopsy began.
Now, what I'd like to do is talk to you about Doris Washington's autopsy, if I can. Well, first of all, I'll move this back. After reviewing the autopsy reports, can you describe in general kind of the way in which the autopsies were performed? In other words, who did which autopsy, what time the external view was done? Kind of the very briefly the mechanics.
Certainly. And if I could, in this stack, go to the beginning page of the autopsy reports. As indicated on the first page of the autopsy report for Doris Washington, that autopsy was performed by Dr. Chancellor, and that autopsy began at 10:35 a.m. And as indicated by the first page of the autopsy report, the autopsy of Nishonda Washington was performed by Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, and that autopsy began at 10:45 a.m.
Now, if we can talk in general, first of all, if you assume that the court should find from the evidence and by its greater weight that during the course of the trial there was testimony that the fire department came and discovered these bodies at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. This would indicate, would it not, that the autopsies were not begun until roughly 9.5 hours later?
Correct.
Now, when an autopsy is started and a rape kit is requested by the police because they suspect rape, can you tell me what happens with the external view, when reference samples are gathered, and when the rape kit itself is actually gathered from the individuals? Certainly.
In general, the first thing that you would want to do at autopsy is an external examination. You want to verify identity and take photographs as the body is received. Then you would proceed with an external examination noting things like natural processes and hair color, that type of thing, and injuries. Before you proceed with the internal examination, you would then want to do two things, and you would do those at separate times. One is take your toxicology samples. Those are generally taken from the front of the thigh and the femoral vein in order to give you the best possible toxicology results. And at that time, a couple of drops of blood are put on your reference sample card, and those are your reference samples for your blood, for your DNA, for the decedent. It's up to the pathologist of whether they want to do that first or last. In general, since that is creating a hole and drops of blood on the body, it would be better first to do your sexual assault exam and the rape kit. And so that is done as a speculum exam, just as you would in a clinical office. The perineal area, the anal area, and the vaginal vault are examined visually, and swabs are taken from the mouth, from the vagina, and the anus at one after the other. You would take a swab from that region, you would smear slides, and then that swab is placed to dry. And then you would repeat that procedure at the different areas of the body before you proceed with your internal examination.
And based on your review of these autopsy reports, in what order was that done on these two women? In other words, who was first?
Well, according to the first page of the autopsy report, the examination of Doris Washington began first, and that was performed by Dr. Chancellor. As she was a fellow at the time, her attending physician, Dr. Thompson, from Standard and from his testimony, observed but did not participate in her performing the sexual assault examination. So he observed her doing it. And as would be standard in any medical examiner's office, one autopsy is kept separate from the other. And so Doris Washington's autopsy, first external examination would be performed at an autopsy station, and those specimens collected would be put in a special area isolated to that autopsy station. Then after Dr. Thompson observed Dr. Chancellor doing her examination, then he would have proceeded with his examination, again at a separate autopsy station with those samples that he collected in a separate area.
And then at some point, either before or after, reference samples would also be taken.
Correct.
Now, are you aware if there has been a suggestion that somehow maybe these samples were switched to try to explain away the DNA results for Jermac Jones?
Yes.
Can you tell the court exactly how many errors would have to be made in order to switch these samples?
Well, there would have to be multiple errors in that the same DNA was found within Nishonda in both the anal and the vaginal region, so both of those swabs would have to be swapped. The reference samples would have to be swapped, and this office kept duplicate smear slides looking for sperm on a slide, and so those would have to be swapped as well, so it would require multiple errors.
And would a swap of these, either slides or swabs, explain why a second man's DNA was found?
No.
In your opinion, based upon your review of the autopsies and the data in this case, did a swap somehow, a series of catastrophic errors occur in swapping the reference samples and these samples to somehow yield a result for Jermac Jones and Doris Washington that shouldn't have been there?
No.
Do you see any evidence whatsoever to support that suggestion at all?
No.
What I'd like to do is talk to you about Doris Washington's autopsy first. So drawing your attention to Defendants Exhibit 22. Have you had an opportunity to previously examine the manner and mechanism of death for Doris Washington?
Yes.
And can you describe very briefly what that manner and mechanism of death was?
Well, the mechanism of death is the cause of death, and it was twofold. Blunt force injury to the abdomen, which resulted in laceration of the liver and subsequent exsanguination, and there was also evidence of strangulation.
We're going to show you what we've marked for identification purposes. It's Defendants Exhibit 25. Can you describe for me what Defendants Exhibit 25 appears to be?
Certainly. This is, the autopsy number is just below the frame of the photo here. This is a photograph of the liver of Doris Washington after it was removed from the body and placed upon a photo board, and it depicts the 4-inch laceration in her liver.
And just for the record, you can barely see it at the bottom, but the autopsy number appeared to be 91-1121.
Correct.
Okay, and that would correspond with Doris Washington's autopsy.
Yes.
And the laceration of the liver, if you can show to the court where that laceration is.
Certainly. For orientation purposes, this is the top side superior, so this would be towards the head, and this is the bottom side. And the laceration is here within the right lobe of the liver, the separation of the tissue.
And for the record, the liver is located on this side.
Yes, in this area.
And how would you describe this laceration? Is it a large laceration?
Yes, this is a severe laceration.
And based upon your review of the autopsy, do you have an opinion as to how that could have been inflicted?
Yes, because there is no focal bruising on the external abdomen, and because this laceration in an adult would require great force, I would think that it would be a broad-based object, such as a knee or a foot kicking. Because this is such a large laceration, I would suspect that Ms. Washington was up against a hard surface when she received this blunt force trauma, thus trapping her liver in between what was creating the force and her spinal column, allowing that force to be transferred to the liver. So a stomping if she were on the ground, or forceful kicking, or if she were up against the wall.
And did Ms. Washington also have ligature marks on her neck?
She did.
And was the cause of death from strangulation, or was it from blood loss from the liver injury?
The cause of death was listed by the autopsy report as blunt force injury to the abdomen because of there was definite bleeding from this injury that would have resulted in severe loss of blood and loss of life. There may have been a contribution of strangulation as well to the cause of death.
I'd like to move on in her autopsy, if I could, show you some more photographs. I'm now going to show you what I've marked for identification purposes as Defendants Exhibit 26 and Defendants Exhibit 27.
Is it, I'm sorry, I need to ask a question.
Yeah.
Is that a 27? It looks like a 22.
Yes, that's a 27. That's my poor excuse for 27. Have you seen Defendants Exhibit 26 and 27 before?
I have.
And again, Defendants Exhibit 26 and 27 bears the ME numbers underneath for,
Yeah.
for Doris Washington of 90-1121.
Yes.
And would this indicate to you that the pathologists were taking great care to properly identify everything that was going on in this autopsy?
Yes.
I noticed that the pathologists were actually using a ruler underneath this. This is in centimeters, is that correct?
Correct.
And the purpose of that, again, would be to accurately record the evidence they're finding.
Yes.
And that would be proper procedure.
Yes.
It would not be proper, for example, simply take a picture of something you say is evidence and not even put a ruler.
Correct. Well, the ruler is for scale so that you can compare the measurement later, and the autopsy number gives you your independent identifier.
All right. Now, Doctor, what I'd like to do is ask you what we're looking at in 26 and 27.
Okay.
Because it's not apparent to most people what exactly that is. So if you could just tell me what we're looking at, and then we'll see if we can explain it as we go through.
Certainly. What we're seeing in Defendants Exhibit 26 is after the external examination of the autopsy, the standard procedure when you suspect that there has been sexual assault is to remove the entire pelvic block. And what this results in is that you have the perineal area and the vaginal vault, and then the cervix and uterus with the fallopian tubes and the ovaries attached. And the reason why you do that is that traditionally, even in cases of known sexual assault, when you look with a speculum exam, you may or may not see injury, you may or may not see bruises, but then when you examine this entire pelvic block, you look for evidence of bruising or hemorrhage within the tissue, and that allows you to have evidence that great force was used and therefore an inference of sexual assault.
Let me see if I can do a poor drawing that may help illustrate your testimony.
Certainly.
So we can all get an idea of what you're talking about. Now, with apologies to Picasso, can you describe what I've drawn here and how this will help illustrate what's shown in those photographs?
Certainly. That would be an anatomical examination showing the head being towards the ceiling, feet towards the ground, and depicting the perineal area with the vagina actually being a closed space, so it's a long tube that is longer than it is wide, and that goes up to the uterus and fallopian tubes and ovaries.
So the opening here would be the vagina, and then we would have the vaginal.
Well, the opening would be the vaginal vault, and then where you have the arrow to right now would be the vaginal canal.
And this would be the uterus,
Correct.
and then these would be fallopian tubes and ovaries
Correct.
on either side.
Correct.
Now, can you point out to the court where these structures are located in the picture that's not the wall?
Certainly. Keeping in mind, in Defendants Exhibit 26, keeping in mind that as it's in the body, the vagina is actually a closed space. And so when it's removed from the body, this open area is now the vaginal vault, with the cervix being here, the uterus being here, and the ovaries and fallopian tubes being on both sides here.
Now, do those pictures demonstrate a wound to
They
the
do.
vaginal canal?
Yes,
And can you show the court where that wound is on those photographs?
certainly. The wound is here, and it's given a 9 o'clock description, as is the standard in a clinical exam. The clock face description was used if you're doing a pelvic exam so that you can describe to other clinicians the locations of injuries, and that would be as if you were doing the pelvic exam. So with 12 o'clock being towards the head, 6 and 3 and 9 o'clock. So this wound was about a half an inch in length. It was horizontally oriented, meaning toward parallel to the ground, and it was described as being 1.5 inches from the cervical os, or the opening of the cervix, meaning that it was about midway to upper into the actual vaginal walls.
Your Honor, this time I just merely ask that we be included in the,
Sorry?
and go back and if we can just kind of step up and be able to be.
Fair enough. Would you please explain to the state where the wound in Doris Washington was located?
Certainly, and I'll start over for orientation
Thank you.
purposes. The head would be here, feet here, right and left. And so again, this entire space here would represent the vaginal vault. And so again, in the body, it's a closed space, a long tube, but as you take the pelvic block and you purposely splay it out, it creates this wide area here. This being the cervical os, going into the uterus here, and then the right fallopian tube and ovary, and the left fallopian tube and ovary here. The wound is depicted here at the 9 o'clock position, and for a traditional pelvic exam, this would be 12, 6, 3, and 9 o'clock positions. It was described as being 1.5 inches from the cervical os, and so it's about midway, maybe a little higher than midway up on the vaginal wall.
Thank you.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
So if I put a horizontal line here on this illustration, that roughly represents where the laceration is depicted in those photographs.
Yes.
All right, let's do that. And did you review Dr. Chancellor's testimony from trial?
No, I had
I mean, Dr. Thompson's.
Thompson's, yes.
And did you see from Dr. Thompson's testimony that he was of the opinion this wound was inflicted just before death?
Yes.
And do you have an opinion as to whether that is accurate?
Yes, I believe that it was inflicted on or about the time of death.
We heard testimony yesterday that male sperm was found in the bloody fluid in the vagina. Where would that blood have come from?
The blood would have come from this wound within the wall.
So the blood from the wound that was inflicted just before death would have mixed in with sperm and yielded those vaginal swabs.
Correct.
Now, Dr. Chancellor, there has been a suggestion during the course of this litigation that because Doris Washington was allegedly a prostitute, that this kind of laceration, this kind of wound, could occur as a result of vigorous, normal sexual activity. I'd like you to assume that suggestion's been made. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not that's accurate?
I do have an opinion.
And what is that opinion?
I do not believe that is accurate.
And can you explain the basis for your opinion?
Certainly. The vaginal walls are movable, they're expansile, and I think the best way to think of it is most people don't walk around thinking of the vagina as an anatomic structure, but unless you're a physician or anatomy teacher, just like the kidney and the liver, the vagina has a function in the body, and its function is related to procreation. So it is a potential space. It is a long tube. It's longer than it is wide. And its first role is to make sure that the sperm get up to the uterus so that the eggs can be fertilized. Its second role is that once the baby has developed, it then becomes the birth canal. And it has to expand from a potential space to deliver a baby. And it has to expand without bursting because it'll kill the mother. And so the walls of the vagina are very elastic, and they're designed to expand. So in normal consensual sex, whether it's vigorous, whether it's rough, you do not get an injury to the vaginal wall. Even typically in sexual assault cases and in birth of a baby, where you do get tears is outside the body, where the tissue is tethered to bony structures and muscle, and that's when you get an episiotomy during birth. It's that outside tissue that tears. The inside tissue on the walls of the vagina do not tear.
In your experience, Dr. Chancellor,
Dr. Roberts.
In how many other cases out of the thousands of autopsies that you've done have you seen a wound to the vaginal wall similar to this?
I've only seen it in one case where a broom handle was forcibly inserted within the vagina and extended all the way up into the abdominal cavity.
Do you have an opinion as to how this wound was inflicted on Doris Washington just before her death?
Yes, this wound, if it represents a laceration, which would be blunt force trauma, would have to be an object inserted with great force. If it had a sharp end, that would facilitate that. Considering that the wound edges were described as smooth in all the photographs I've seen, I don't see any abraded or roughened edges. It may have been an object that had some sharpness to the tip of it.
We know now, as of 2010, that male sperm was found in the bloody fluid in the vagina. Given the nature, location, and cause of this wound, given the materials that you reviewed, and adding to it this newly discovered DNA, do you have an opinion as to whether there was a sexual assault of Doris Washington before her death?
Yes, I believe there was.
And can you explain what the basis for that opinion are?
Well, it's the entire death investigation, as I indicated before. She has blunt force trauma to the face, evidence of strangulation, blunt force trauma to the abdomen, and she has a wound within her vaginal vault that is accompanied by vital reaction of the tissue. So it was performed on or about the time of death, not after death. But there's no healing, so we know it's on or about time of death, and it's accompanied by sperm. So all of that taken together as a whole would tell me as a forensic pathologist that there was a sexual assault associated with her homicide.
Thank you. And I guess for purposes of the record, I'm going to mark my illustration as Defendants Exhibit 28.
And I have Defendants Exhibit 27. Would you like me to
Yes.
address that as well?
If you will hold up Defendants Exhibit 27 and tell us what that depicts, first to the court and then to the state.
Certainly. Defendants Exhibit 27 shows the same independent identifier autopsy number and is a zoom-in photograph of the same area that we looked in at the wound. And so for orientation purposes, again, this is 9 o'clock, this is the cervical os, and the wound is here. And this represents a blown up or zoom-in photograph.
Now, if I can, I'd like to turn briefly to Nishonda Washington's autopsy. Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
And what was the mechanism of Nishonda Washington's death?
Strangulation by ligature.
And during the course of obtaining the rape kit that the police wanted, did the medical examiner identify any substances in her anus or vagina?
Gross examination, meaning physical examination, they saw a creamy fluid within her vaginal vault. And when swabs were taken, I believe that portions or intact sperm were found both in the anal region and the vaginal region.
And I'd like to talk with you about the significance of finding intact sperm in the vaginal region. We heard testimony yesterday that that would indicate a deposit of less than 24 hours. Do you have an opinion as to whether that's accurate or not?
I would agree with that.
Okay. Now, I would like to ask you a hypothetical question. Well, first of all, let me connect that back up. So we know the rape kit was gathered roughly between 10:30 and 10:45 on the morning after the murders.
Correct.
Which means that within that 24-hour period, whoever left the sperm in Nishonda Washington's anus and vagina would have had to do that, 24 hours being the very outside.
Correct.
Which would correspond roughly to about 10:30 the prior, between 10:30 the prior morning and 10:30 the next morning.
Correct.
Okay. If the court should find from the evidence and by its greater weight that in a supplementary investigation of Doris Washington on the day of the murders, that is the day before the 1 a.m. call, and that she left at approximately 10:30, and that Nishonda Washington indicated when she left that she was going to take a bath. I'd like you to assume all those facts are true as I've recited them, and this is located at page 8 of the supplementary investigation report. If in fact Nishonda Washington took a bath, can you describe how that would impact your opinion concerning when the sperm, in particular the intact sperm, was left within Nishonda Washington?
Well, that would make it more likely that those sperm were deposited after that bath, simply because of mechanics of soaking in a bathtub and the water cleansing both the external area and somewhat entering the vaginal area. So cleansing that area, and the heat of the water would make the sperm break down faster, especially in the anal region.
I have no further questions, Sean.
All right, cross-exam.
Thank you. I'm going to start backwards. Can you tell me if there would be a difference between a bath and a shower?
Certainly. If you're standing in a shower and water is running downwards, then certainly the external areas are generally cleansed. If you're soaking in a tub, if you're in the water, then some of that water can enter the vaginal vault. If you're standing, that would be upwards and water would flow downwards with gravity.
So there would be more likely that the sperm would stay in if it was just a shower.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, there's two different areas. So the shower would really not affect the anal region, whether it stayed in or not. It would only cleanse the external region. The shower water going downward in the vaginal region would cleanse the outward region and would not go upwards into the vagina, but then you also have gravity causing the semen to come out of the vagina as well.
Yet you walk around and do a lot of other things that are external that still keep vagina in for up to 5 days, correct?
Not up to 5 days, no.
Not up to 5 days?
Well, Are you talking about intact sperm or?
I'm talking about, sperm as a whole, because basically and help me try to understand, because I'm not a geneticist, and I've heard from several different individuals about how crazy the sperm stuff is and how it stays in the body. And from my understanding, that a person can have sperm in their body for several days. And they're still cleaning and washing.
This is going to depend on the location.
Okay.
Again, thinking back to basic science and anatomy, the entire purpose for the vaginal vault, cervical os is an opening to the uterus and to facilitate the fertilization of the egg. And so the cervix actually excretes a mucus that has a special chemical in there that helps those sperm survive. So if the sperm are in the anus, they degrade quicker because they don't have that chemical. If they're right at the opening of the vaginal vault or at the perineum, they're going to degrade quicker. If they've made it all the way up to the cervix and they're in that cervical mucus, those are the sperm that can survive the longest.
But based on this, you can't tell when the sperm was deposited.
Well, you can look at whether or not they were intact or not and know how long that they could survive. And the first thing that they do is lose the tails. And so in the anus, that's going to happen quicker. In the cervical mucus, it would be retained longer. Now, you might see evidence of sperm later, but they won't be intact sperm.
And you were able to look at the trial transcript you stated?
Yes.
And so isn't it true that, well, let me ask you this first. Have you ever seen a sexual assault without a knife?
Yes.
And have you seen a sexual assault with merely a knife, merely an object, and no penile penetration?
I don't think that you would be able to tell that post-mortem.
Why would you not be able to tell that post-mortem?
Well, you can see evidence of injury to the vaginal vault and not find evidence of sperm, but that doesn't mean that there was not penile penetration.
So you wouldn't be able to tell?
Correct.
Okay. So in a spot where there was both a knife and a possible sexual encounter, you can't tell which came first, the knife or the sperm?
Correct.
So in this case, you have no time frame except for the fact that the knife was fairly close to the time of death?
On or about the time of death, yes.
Yet you can't do the same with the sperm?
Correct. I can say within that time frame. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you stated that you actually went through this transcript and you agree with a lot of the things that of the testimony of Dr. Thompson, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, he stated to the court, to the jury, that you could tell the injury, that the mechanism, which was a laceration of the liver, could occur absent of obvious penetration injury to the abdomen. And he stated, yes, this would have occurred with some kind of object relatively wide, certainly not something small like a stick or a knife, certainly not a knife. And then he goes into, now you've indicated that there was a vaginal tear. By what mechanism would such of a tear occurred? Something, and the answer was something that would have been placed inside the vagina. Now, I cannot tell what that something was, but it had to be placed inside the vagina and some pressure upon it to cause the tear. That was actually in the transcript?
Yes.
And that was before the jury. So the jury knew that there had been some sort of trauma, that there was some sort of assault associated with the homicide.
I'm confused if your question is specifically concerning the liver, concerning the vagina, or just in general that there was evidence of blunt force trauma.
Okay, let's just go with just the vagina for right now. There was evidence put before the jury that there was something that was used close to death that caused that injury.
Correct.
Now going back to the liver, they actually talked about it in the prosecutor actually asked about the blunt force trauma, and he said, how could this be done? They said it could have been a knee, it could have been a board, or anything like that. And that's consistent with your findings as well.
Yes, if you're asking me specifically what was in the transcript, I recall that they did say knee. I don't recall a board, but it was basically a broad-based instrument that we use for blunt force trauma, correct?
Okay. So all of these findings that you're making here are consistent with what was put before the jury back in 1995?
Objection to all findings.
Is that your question?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear us.
All the findings?
Yes, all the findings. In the medical examiner's report.
You can answer that if you can.
I think that that's a complicated question, but what I believe that you're asking me, I'm going to need you to rephrase that, please.
Okay. You stated that you agree that there was blunt force trauma that caused that, that there was blunt force trauma that caused the injury to the liver.
To the liver, yes.
You believe also, you agree with their testimony at trial that something was placed forcibly into the vagina causing the tear.
Correct.
I don't understand where anything different is in your findings than in the findings that the medical examiners put before the jury back then.
Well, as I understand it, that new information was put forth that there was a male DNA from the sperm fraction that was not available at the time of trial, and we have that information now. So as we discussed earlier, within the bloody fluid from the vagina of Doris Washington, male DNA was discovered within the sperm fraction, and that information was not known before. And so all told, in combination, as I said, with all of the evidence together, that would lead me to believe that there was sexual assault involved at the same time as her homicide.
Okay. Now let's talk about that DNA. Were you aware that DNA was found in Nishonda at the time of death?
Yes.
And were you aware that they tested that DNA?
Yes.
Were you aware that that DNA did not come back to the defendant?
Yes.
And were you aware that throughout the trial transcript or anything that no individual had ever identified any 13 or 15-year-old wandering around?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Did you ever note in any of these where anybody stated that they had seen a 13 or 15? Have you read the whole entire transcript?
No.
Let's say, for instance, so you didn't know that Angela Oliver actually testified at the trial?
No.
Did you know that she testified that she was present in the apartment?
Objection, Your Honor, that's not correct. That was a tape that she made that was played at trial. She actually recanted that on the trial stand, as we described earlier. So I object to the characterization. She did not testify to that at trial. A previous tape was played at trial when she recanted her testimony.
I'll rephrase the question, Your Honor.
All right.
Were you aware that a statement that was made to police was played to the jury that stated that Ms. Oliver was present in that house at the time that this homicide occurred?
No.
I have to object to that. That's on the tape. So the tape says she was there and then left and something went on. It didn't say she was present while the alleged killings were taking place.
Let me rephrase. That she was present when they entered. That, let me go and find the exact words that I'll read to you. the transcript.
Details, just to help you out, I don't believe they actually transcribed the tape statement in the transcript.
That's,
I don't believe they actually transcribed the tape.
That's why I'm
in the
looking for
transcript.
the
Right.
transcription of the tape. I'll be right back with you. Okay, were you aware that there was the tape that was played before the jury?
No.
And were you aware that in that tape, Miss Oliver, who also went by Miss Sutherland, made several statements, including that she was interviewed by Investigator Dowdy. And it says, at this time, Miss Angela, will you please tell me any information that you have related to this incident which took place on 11/27/1991? Miss Sutherland, please speak clearly and into the mic and discuss and tell me what you're aware of that took place in Kew Gardens. Well, me and Darryl went there to get his money and his drugs. The lady did not have his drugs. Okay, when you say Darryl, Darryl who? Sutherland, Howard, Dowdy. Darryl Howard? When you, the lady, which lady? Doris. Whatever her name, Doris. I know when I see her. We used to go up there. Dowdy then asks, is that Doris Washington? Sutherland, that's it, that's her. Me and him went there to pick up his package or his money. We went there early that day, she didn't have it. He said, if you don't have it, I'm going to kill you, your motherfucking ass. If you don't have that damn money or my package, then I'll get it back. When we went to Fayetteville Street Project and came back, we had his brother Wiz. We call him Harvey, or we call Wiz Harvey Howard. And then we went back. She didn't have it. I went into the house with him. He still didn't have the stuff. So he started jumping on her. And after a while, he grabbed her. And he pushed her against the wall. At first, he grabbed her and he said, let's go. He started to take her upstairs. He told me to get outside, gone, because he didn't want to make me around. He didn't want me to be around what he was fixing to do to her. And I asked him not to do it. And the next thing I know, there was a whole lot of noise. There was hollering and screaming. I stood outside on the porch. Wiz went in there. He was in there with them. The next thing I know, the lights came on upstairs, and after a while, it got quiet. He turned off the lights. He left, and he set a fire. Dowdy. How you know he set a fire? Because me and Wiz was outside when the fire started, and he jumped in the car and we left. He was the only person in the house. Dowdy. Now let's go back. You said that you and Darryl Howard went back to Kew Gardens to Doris's house.
Let's do a question here.
I'm getting there. Now, with that information, knowing that she was present in that short time span and in what she said, is that type of beating that caused these injuries? Stomping on her, throwing up her against the wall and beating her?
Certainly stomping on her would cause blunt force injury and may cause blunt force trauma to the liver, yes.
Thank you. So based on that information, isn't it possible that she could have had sex prior to this incident with Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Let me follow up on that very quickly. In Ms. Oliver's statement, she doesn't mention anything about something being thrust into Ms. Washington's vagina with such force to cause laceration.
No.
At least the part that was read to you. She doesn't talk about Mr. Howard taking off her clothes, does she?
No.
And were you aware at trial that Ms. Sutherland said that she didn't know anything about this murder?
I was not aware of that.
Are you aware at trial that Ms. Sutherland testified that she hadn't told the truth on that tape?
I'm not aware of that.
Are you aware that Ms. Sutherland testified at trial that she'd been pressured by the police to make that statement and didn't agree?
I'm not aware of that either.
And as a forensic pathologist, what you're going on is the physical evidence rather than somebody's statement that may or may not be true or can be changed or subject to influence. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, Ms. Ellis asked you whether all of the opinions that you've given were before the jury trial, and you described obviously that the sexual assault opinion you've given based on the finding of sperm in the bloody discharge was not before the jury because they didn't have that evidence. Is that fair?
Correct.
Are you aware that at trial, the state of North Carolina elicited testimony from a detective saying it was never suspected to be, these were never suspected to be sexual assaults?
That information was provided to me.
Okay. And is that contradicted by what you have now found?
Yes.
In fact, I heard Ms. Ellis suggest that the jury knew there were sexual assaults at trial. In fact, the state of North Carolina argued that there were no sexual assaults at trial. Is that not correct?
That is a two-part question, but yes, that is correct.
I have no further questions.
I just have one. Were you aware that Angela did say those things, yet the judge actually let that tape in, and the jury was able to listen and hear her demeanor, listen to the tapes, listen to all the evidence before the jury, and come back with a guilty?
I was not aware of that.
You were not aware of that? Were you also aware that that argument had been made before the Court of Appeals about Ms. Sutherland's testimony, and that they ruled that that was no error?
I was not aware of that.
And are you, I'm not even going to ask that question. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Just one quick follow-up. Are you aware that after the Court of Appeals decided this case, permitting the tape to be introduced despite Ms. Oliver's recantation, the Supreme Court of the United States decided a case called Crawford, which found that admission of tapes like this in the future would violate the Confrontation Clause of the United States Constitution?
I was not aware of that.
One just last clarifying question. Did this case happen in the future?
Is your question, obviously this is an old case, so the answer to that is no.
Thank you.
And if the case is retried, the law as it exists now would apply, would it not?
I would assume so.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
All right, you can come back. All right, Mr. Deputy, let's take a break until 11:15.
Court will raise it till 11:15.
Shall I leave these right here?